He bought the ring. It sat in his sock drawer for 6 weeks, right next to a receipt for a $4,000 exhaust system he ordered the same week. 8 years. That's how long I gave that man before I found what I found in that sock drawer. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I was not naive, I was not stupid, and I was not desperate. I was in love, and I had a plan. And for a very long time, those two things felt like the same thing. The ring was real. The receipt next to it was also real. And the 6 weeks of silence between those two pieces of paper, that was the answer to every question I'd been too hopeful to ask out loud. So let me take you back to where it started, because you need to see the whole picture to understand why finding that box didn't make me scream. It made me go very, very quiet. I was 20 years old when I met Cole, and I want to be honest, it felt like finding someone in the dark. We were both far from home, both figuring out adulthood in real time, splitting grocery bills and watching movies on a laptop propped on a shoebox. There was nothing glamorous about it. String lights from the dollar section, takeout from the place that gave you extra rice if you asked nice. But we were so happy in that apartment, genuinely happy, the kind of happy that makes you think you've cracked some code everyone else is still working on. He made me laugh every single day. That part was always true. And I think that's what made everything else so hard to see clearly for so long. About a year in, Cole started talking about going home. His home state, not mine. He had a picture of it in his head. A house, a yard, room to actually breathe. And somehow, in the way that love makes rearranging your whole life sound like an adventure, I said yes. I told myself it wasn't giving anything up. It was building something new. Together. I packed 12 boxes and a lamp I'd had since high school, and I stood on that curb outside our apartment, and I felt excited. I genuinely felt excited. The U-Haul was stuffed to the ceiling with everything I owned, and the promise holding it all together was 4 words: we'll build something real. I didn't ask what real meant to him. I assumed we meant the same thing. We moved in with his mom, Rhonda, while we saved. And Rhonda, she's a good woman. I need to say that clearly. She fed us constantly, kept the house warm, asked about my day with real interest. But there is a specific kind of tired that comes from living in someone else's home, from gauging whether you're too loud, too much, taking up space that isn't technically yours. I'd wash the dishes before they could pile up because leaving them felt rude. I'd check whether the bathroom was free before I showered. Small things, constant things. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I was always aware, this is temporary. Cole said so. Once we save enough, we'll have our own place, our own life, the next thing. I was very good at waiting for the next thing. Cole got a good job about 8 months in. Steady, real money, nothing flashy, but solid. I got stable too, a role I actually liked. And for a minute, everything felt like it was clicking into place the way we'd planned. We were sitting outside one evening, Rhonda's backyard, cheap beer and lawn chairs, and Cole said it so casually, like he was reading off a grocery list. Once we're financially stable, I'll propose. He said it with a smile, that easy, loose grin he always had, like it was a given, like it was already decided. And honestly, it felt like a gift. I took that sentence, and I held it like a contract. I didn't ask for a timeline. I didn't ask what stable looked like in numbers. I just nodded and thought, okay, we have a plan. I started imagining it in detail the way you do when you're genuinely certain something is coming. Not obsessively. I wasn't making vision boards, but privately, quietly, in the margins of ordinary days. I'd see a venue photo and think, that's the vibe. I'd overhear a song and file it away. I had a whole mental file I never talked about because I didn't want to seem like a woman who needed it too badly, who was making the relationship about a ring instead of about him. I thought if I wanted it quietly enough, it would come without pressure. I thought being easy, being patient, being the kind of girlfriend who didn't push, I thought that was what love looked like. It was the first thing I got wrong about myself. Then Cole bought a truck. Not a sensible car. A truck, a big one. The kind with the chrome running boards and the tinted rear window and a payment that I knew, without asking, was not small. He was so happy about it. He stood in the driveway with his hand on the hood like he'd won something, and I remember thinking, okay, we must be more stable than I realized, which meant we were close. I didn't say a word about it. He works hard, I told myself. He deserves something nice. He's allowed to have things. Every one of those thoughts was true. And every one of them was also doing the job of not asking the question I should have asked. So, when's the ring? I filed the truck under "he's happy" and moved on. That was the first time I actively chose not to add it up. Then came the season tickets. NFL, which I actually liked. I'm not going to pretend I didn't have fun because I did. Cole in his jersey, me in a team cap, nachos and bad beer, and the actual rush of a close game. We went every home game. Then he picked up NBA tickets too. Same season, different arena. And somewhere around the third or fourth game, a thought crossed my mind so quickly I almost missed it. How much was that exactly? Not both sets? Just one. I went home and I looked it up because I couldn't help myself. NFL season tickets, lower section, our team, roughly $4,000 a seat, so $8,000 for both of us, just for football. I closed the browser and I didn't say anything. I told myself it wasn't my money to track. I really believed that, or I made myself believe it. I'm still not sure which. The first motorcycle I understood. He'd talked about wanting one since before we moved. When it appeared in the garage, I was surprised, but I managed to absorb it. Then a second one showed up 3 months later, a different model, something he'd been watching on a forum. And I stood in the doorway of that garage, looking at 2 motorcycles gleaming under fluorescent light, and something I'd been holding gently for a long time started to feel heavier. I asked, as lightly as I could manage, "I thought we were saving for a ring." He laughed, genuinely laughed. Not mean, not dismissive, just the way he laughed at anything that felt far away. "We're fine, babe," he said. "It's coming." It's coming. I added that to the pile with "once we're stable" and "before New Year's," and all the other sentences I had started collecting without meaning to. We bought a house. And I want to be fair to myself here. That felt like something. It felt like proof. You don't buy a house with someone you're not serious about, right? That's what I told myself every single time the other thought crept in. I threw myself into that house completely. I spent 3 weekends painting the living room. A warm sage green, which I loved, still love, draped drop cloths over everything we owned, climbed up and down a stepladder until my arms were sore. I picked the towels, the throw pillows, the cabinet hardware. I made it a home. And yes, a part of me was aware that I was pouring something into those walls that I maybe should have been holding back. But a bigger part of me thought, this is what loving someone looks like. You show up, you build, you stay. We threw a housewarming maybe 2 months after we moved in. Their friends, my friends, Rhonda with a platter of lumpia, music, and too many people in a space that was still mostly boxes. It was genuinely fun. And then someone, I don't even remember who, some guy from Cole's work, asked it loudly in the middle of the room. "So Cole, when you putting a ring on it?" The whole little cluster laughed. It was a normal question, a joke question, the kind people ask at parties. Cole laughed too, but his eyes, just for a second, maybe 2, went somewhere else. Not nervous, not caught, just somewhere else, like a door closing very quietly inside him, and I was across the room and I saw it, and I filed it. I didn't let myself decide what it meant, but I filed it. 2 years ago, Cole suggested we go ring shopping. Actually suggested it, unprompted, a Saturday afternoon. "Let's go to the mall. I want to look at rings." My heart was loud the whole drive over. We went to a jewelry store, the kind with the glass cases that run the whole perimeter, and a salesperson who asks how you're doing in a way that means, "Can I help you spend money?" Cole stood back with his hands in his pockets while she showed me tray after tray, and I found it. A simple solitaire, Clean and honest, just right. I pointed to it, my voice completely steady because I was determined not to make this weird. Cole nodded, said it was nice. Then we left. He didn't buy it that day. He said he wanted to think about the style, make sure he got the right one. I said that made sense. I was so careful not to want it too visibly. I called Desta on the way home, told her we'd gone ring shopping, that I'd found the one, that Cole seemed interested, that it felt close. Desta asked me the exact right question in the exact wrong way. Did he actually buy anything? I said no, and I had about 4 buts lined up. She let me run through all of them. Then she said, okay, in that voice she has, the one that means she has a thought she's choosing not to share yet, out of love. I told her it still counted for something that he took me, that he initiated it, that a man who wasn't serious wouldn't have walked into that store. Desta nodded. I could hear the nod, and said, yeah, maybe. She believed in me too much to say the thing she was thinking, and I was grateful for that. At least, I was grateful then. The engagement happened on a Tuesday of all days. Desta called me on my lunch break, voice pitched an octave higher than usual, and I could hear Pierre laughing in the background. I congratulated her so hard my throat hurt. And I meant every word of it, truly. The celebration dinner was warm and loud and full of good food, and I watched Pierre look at Desta like she was the only fixed point in the room. I drove home alone, got about 4 blocks from the restaurant before I had to pull over because I was crying too hard to see the lane lines. Not out of jealousy. I want to be clear about that. Out of something more embarrassing. Hope. Because if Pierre could do it, then Cole could do it. Any day now, right? The year that followed was a study in watching other people's lives accelerate while mine idled at the same intersection. 2 friends announced pregnancies within 3 months of each other. Both married, both planned. I'd scroll past the announcements and feel this specific, ungenerous pang that I wasn't proud of. Cole and I had a firm agreement. No kids before marriage. That was mine to hold as much as his, and I'd meant it. But I was 27 now, and before marriage had a different weight than it did at 20. I started doing math in my head that I didn't share with anyone, not even Desta. The kind of math you do when a timeline is no longer hypothetical. Christmas Eve, Cole's family does it right. Rhonda's house smells like lumpia and pine. Everybody's got a drink. The tree is drowning in ornaments. I was sitting on the couch watching his cousins argue about a board game, and something just landed on me. Quietly, I counted back the Christmases. This was the 4th one where I'd told myself, next year. The ornament on the branch nearest me was one we'd bought together our first holiday as a couple, a little ceramic house with our initials scratched in with a pen because the engraving cost extra. I stared at it, and then I started crying, and I could not make myself stop. Cole noticed. Of course he did. He's not oblivious, just avoidant, and those are different things. He came and got me without making a scene, just touched my elbow and steered us out to the front porch. It was cold, bare trees, the neighbors' lights blinking orange and white across the street. I told him, another year went by. That's all I said. He pulled my face into his hands, both hands, thumbs on my cheekbones, and looked at me like I was the only thing in the world he didn't want to lose. He said, I'm going to fix this, I promise, before New Year's. And I believed him. God help me, I believed him completely. He bought the ring before New Year's. He showed me the confirmation on his phone. I could see the price, the item description, the little check mark that meant it was done. I put my hands over my mouth. I stood in our kitchen surrounded by the sad little streamers we'd hung for the holiday, and I actually felt my shoulders drop, like I'd been holding them up for years. 8 years. The anxiety I didn't even know I was carrying just exhaled. I thought, this is what relief feels like. I'd forgotten. I went to bed that night thinking about how I was going to feel when he actually got down on one knee, and I slept better than I had in months. New Year's Eve came and went, and I told myself he was waiting for the right moment. New Year's is chaotic. People are drunk. It's not romantic. It's fine. January passed quietly. February started, and I did the thing I am not proud of. I started managing my own expectations out loud. To myself, mostly. He'll probably do it somewhere meaningful, not just a random Tuesday. He wants it to be special. I was coaching myself through patience like it was a sport I could train for. I didn't ask him anything. I didn't want to be the woman who had to ask. I didn't want to ruin whatever he was planning. So I waited, and I was very, very careful not to need anything too loudly. Valentine's Day, he made a reservation, brought flowers, grocery store tulips, which I genuinely like better than roses, so that part was sweet. The dinner was good. He was attentive. We split a piece of chocolate cake and he held my hand across the table, and I kept thinking, okay, this is it. This is the setup. Dessert came and went. The check came. We drove home. I unpacked the flowers into a vase and said nothing. 2 days later, I was sitting across from Desta in her kitchen, telling her I was sure it was still coming, probably something more private and personal. Desta nodded slowly, the kind of slow nod that is not agreement. It's someone choosing their words very carefully. 6 weeks after he bought the ring, I was doing laundry. Completely ordinary Saturday. I had a basket on the hip. I was doing the efficient loop. His dresser to mine, fold, stack. And I opened his sock drawer to put away a pair of his. The drawer stuck a little, the way it always does in winter because the wood swells. I gave it the usual two-handed yank. And there it was, a small square velvet box, dark navy, wedged into the back left corner between a pair of gray socks and a rolled-up receipt. I stood there with his laundry in my hands. The room went very quiet. I almost didn't look at the other thing. But the receipt was right there, half unfolded, wedged behind the box like it had been shoved in fast. I picked it up. It was not the ring receipt. I already knew what that one looked like. I'd seen it on his phone. This one was from an auto shop. Custom exhaust system, $4,200, ordered December 28th. And when I looked at the date on the ring purchase, I'd seen it enough times in my head to know. December 26th, same week. Both purchases, same week. I held one paper in each hand and just stood there in the afternoon light, reading the numbers over and over like they might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. I sat down on the edge of the bed. I didn't cry. I want to say that clearly. I didn't cry. I just sat with the ring box in my lap and let 8 years run through my head in what felt like about 45 seconds. The first truck, the season tickets, the motorcycles. Once we're financially stable, it's coming, babe. The jewelry store, where he stood with his hands in his pockets while I pointed at the one I wanted. Every single time I had told myself the money was the issue, the timing was the issue, that he loved me and he'd get there. He'd bought a $4,000 exhaust system and a ring in the same week, and one of them was still in a drawer. The money had never been the issue, not once. And then I thought about the housewarming party. I don't know why that was the thing that surfaced. It was 2 years ago. It was a throwaway moment. One of his coworkers had asked him, laughing, "So when are you making it official?" And Cole had laughed back, same easy grin he always had, and given some non-answer about timing. But for just a second, before the grin, his eyes had gone somewhere else. I'd filed it away and never looked at it again. Sitting on that bed, I understood what the look was. It wasn't nerves. It wasn't a man who wanted to propose and was scared of getting it wrong. It was relief. The relief of someone who just bought himself a little more time. I put the ring box back exactly where I found it. I smoothed the receipt behind it. I finished the laundry, folded everything, put it away, carried the basket back to the hall closet. My hands were steady. That part surprised me. Then I sat on the top stair and picked up my phone, and I typed one line to Desta. "Can you talk tonight?" No context, no explanation. She replied in under a minute. Just, "Already on my way." I sat there on the stair for another few minutes after that, phone in my lap, listening to the sounds of the house, Cole's TV downstairs, a car outside, the refrigerator hum. All the ordinary sounds of a life I'd built around someone else's readiness, and I thought, okay, now I know. Desta arrived at 8 with a bottle of wine and said nothing until I'd talked for 40 minutes straight. I laid out all of it. The drawer, the box, the exhaust receipt, the dates, the 8 years. She sat with her feet tucked under her on the opposite end of my couch, and she did not say, "I told you so," because Desta is not that person. She let me finish. She let the silence sit for a moment after, and then she asked me one question. "What do you want?" 4 words. Not what did Cole want, not what was fair, not what made sense logistically. What did I want? I opened my mouth to answer, and I realized, with a cold, quiet shock, that I didn't know. Desta's question just hung there in the air between us. "What do you want?" 3 words, and I couldn't answer them. I sat there opening my mouth like I was about to say something obvious, and nothing came out. Because I realized I hadn't asked myself that in years. I'd been so focused on what Cole was ready for, what Cole needed, what Cole's timeline looked like, that my own wants had gone quiet somewhere along the way. And that scared me more than the ring box, more than the exhaust receipt, more than any of it. Because you can be angry at someone else's choices. You can't be angry at your own silence. I didn't sleep much that night. By morning, I'd made a decision. Not out of anger, not out of some dramatic ultimatum energy, just out of the plain, tired understanding that something had to change or I would keep living in amber forever. Cole was at the kitchen table in his jersey, half watching his phone, coffee going cold beside him. I stood across from him and I told him I loved him. And then I told him I was giving him 2 weeks to propose, or I was leaving. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't perform anything. I just stood there and meant every word, and I think that's what made it land differently than anything I'd ever said before. Cole didn't get angry. I think part of me had braced for that. The deflection, the jersey and cargo pants version of, "Where is this coming from?" But instead, he put his face in his hands. And then he cried. He said he was scared. He said he didn't know why. He genuinely didn't know why. He loved me. He just needed a little more time. And I believed all of it. I believed every word was true in the moment he said it. I reached across the table and held his hand. I told him that 2 weeks was more time. It wasn't coldness. It was just the only thing I had left to give. Day 10. I was at the kitchen counter making a grocery list when my phone buzzed. A bank notification from our shared account. I almost didn't look. But I looked. It was a charge from an auto shop. Rims for the truck. $380. I set the phone down and stood there for a moment. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel surprised, which I think was the saddest part. Something in me had already known. The 2 weeks wasn't really about the proposal anymore. It was about whether he was capable of choosing me when choosing me cost him something. That charge told me the answer. Day 14. He came to find me in the living room. I already knew. I'd known since day 10, really. But I waited for him to say it. He asked for another month. He still thought time was the variable. I looked at him for a long moment. This man I had loved at 20 years old in a string-lit apartment eating takeout on the floor. And I said, "I know." Not, "I know you need more time." Just, "I know." He stood there with his hands open, and I went upstairs to pack a bag. I took only what I needed for a week. I thought I might change my mind on the stairs. I didn't. I sat on the bedroom floor, surrounded by half-packed things, and called my mom. I hadn't really talked to her in weeks. I'd been managing the narrative in my head so carefully that I hadn't wanted her voice in it yet. She picked up on the second ring. I told her I was leaving Cole. I told her I'd be home for a bit, and she just said, "I'll make up the room." No told you so. No, I wondered when. Just that, "I'll make up the room." and something in my chest cracked open in the best possible way. Sometimes love sounds like 5 words and a made-up bed. The apartment was small. The walls were the generic off-white of every rental that's ever existed. The floors were a laminate that creaked in one spot near the window, and I loved it immediately. I stood in the bare living room with one box and just looked at the space, the way the afternoon light came through the window at an angle, falling on nothing because nothing was there yet, and it was all mine to fill or leave empty as I wanted. I'd signed the lease myself, my name alone on the dotted line. I don't think I understood how much I'd needed that until I was standing in the quiet of it. 2 weeks after I moved out, I was standing on a step stool hanging curtains. The first ones I'd picked out entirely alone, a deep rust orange that no one else had voted on, when my phone buzzed on the windowsill. I climbed down and looked. It was a photo from Cole. He was in the jewelry store. He was holding the ring I had picked out 2 years ago, still the same one, and the text underneath said he was ready. I stood in my half-hung curtains and stared at that photo for a long time. He'd finally decided to do it. The moment I stopped waiting, I picked up the phone. I looked at the photo long enough that the screen dimmed, and then I set it face down on the windowsill and climbed back up the step stool. I smoothed the curtain into place with both hands. The rust orange looked exactly right against the off-white wall. Here's the thing about that moment. I wasn't angry at him. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't even sad exactly. I just understood something clearly. The proposal only came when I stopped needing it, and what that told me wasn't that he loved me. What it told me was that he'd been waiting for me to stop asking so that he'd never have to answer. I wrote back that night. I sat on the floor of my new apartment. No couch yet, just a rug I liked, and I typed it out carefully. I told him I loved him. I told him I thought he'd known all along that this wasn't really about money or timing or readiness. I told him I thought he needed to figure out what he actually wanted too, because I didn't think he knew. I pressed send before I could soften it. Then I sat in the quiet of my own place and felt, underneath everything else, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt like I was on my own side. 6 months later, Desta had people over for a Saturday thing. Nothing formal. Pierre grilling something that smelled incredible, a few friends on the porch with cold drinks. And I laughed at something. Not a polite laugh, not a social laugh. One of those laughs that comes up from somewhere real, that you can't quite get back under control. Desta looked at me and raised her eyebrows, and I just shook my head like I know. Pierre's ring was on her finger, catching the afternoon light. My own hands were free, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd sat somewhere and not been quietly calculating how much longer I had to wait. I still don't know if what I did was brave. I don't think it felt brave. It felt necessary, the way you finally stop holding your breath not because you decided to, but because your body just couldn't anymore. Cole and I loved each other. I want to say that plainly because it's true and it matters. But love isn't always the whole question. Sometimes the question is whether someone can choose you clearly, without being cornered into it, without waiting until you're already gone. He couldn't, and I had spent 8 years making that my problem to solve, my patience to extend, my timeline to fold myself into. I stopped. That changed everything. I spent 8 years waiting to feel chosen. I kept thinking if I was patient enough, good enough, easy enough to be with, eventually he'd look at me the way Pierre looks at Desta and just know. And maybe he did know. Maybe that was the problem. The choosing was always available to him, and he just kept reaching for something else instead. But here's what I know now. The only person who could actually choose me, first, clearly without conditions, was me. And once I did that, once I really did that, everything else got quieter. Not easier, just quieter. And quiet turned out to be exactly what I needed. If any of this felt familiar, that waiting, that math you keep running in your head, I hope you find your own quiet soon. And if you want to wear something that reminds you who you're building for, Find Drift's World linked below. If you found that ring next to that receipt, would you have given him the 2 weeks, or would you have walked out right then? Tell me below.